So welcome everyone to the first seminar for the spring 2025 semester for the CCPO-ICAR seminar series. I'm very pleased to have Mary Bennett and Joe Rieger here to talk about the Sentinel Landscape Partnership and the Virginia Security Corridor. Mary is the Tidewater Sentinel Landscape Coordinator for the Virginia Security Corridor. She has a passion for wildlife and a strong background in conservation and restoration throughout the southeastern coastal plain. She had previously worked with the Elizabeth River Project as their environmental scientist, and she focused on water quality and urban restoration of tidal marshes. I'm pleased to have her join us, and I'm hoping we'll all have an opportunity to learn more and hopefully learn also how we can be more engaged and be part of this initiative. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you all for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. I'm hoping to, give you guys kind of a course level overview of what the Sentinel Landscape Partnership is and the Virginia Security Corridor. I'm hoping that we can also touch on some unique funding opportunities associated with the Sentinel Landscape Partnership, as well as a few success stories and ways to be involved. Most importantly, I really just wanted to introduce myself and open lines of communication with anyone here that I may not have met yet. And then Joe Rieger with the Navy is here to speak on a really cool project that they have going on. So that'll be a fun thing that we talk on. Anywho, here we go. So what is a Sentinel Landscape? A Sentinel Landscape is really just a designation. It's a designation by the USDA, the DoD, and now FEMA. So the USDA, the DoD, the DOI, and FEMA. It's defined as an area in which natural and working lands are well suited to protect defense facilities from uses that may be considered incompatible with the military mission. They're also anchored by at least one high-value military installation. So in the case of my landscape, the Tidewater Sentinel Landscape, that's Joint Base Langley Eustis. So to better understand the Virginia Security Corridor on a whole, it's kind of important to understand the greater Sentinel Landscape Partnership. So like I mentioned before, it's made up of the USDA, the DoD, the DOI, and as of last year, FEMA. It allows these federal agencies to collaborate for greater impact in locations where we see those significant agricultural, natural resource, species habitat, and military training. And importantly, it's where these needs intersect. So in 2013, they got together, they had this memorandum of understanding with the mission to strengthen this military readiness, conserve those natural resources, increase public access to outdoor recreation, and promote landscape level resilience. So overall, in the grand scheme of things, these agencies just want to use those taxpayer dollars more efficiently by aligning their efforts in these areas to accelerate work on the ground and by using fewer resources. So I just wanted to give you all a little bit of a timeline of the Sentinel Landscape Partnership. It's been around for a little over a decade. So it began in 2013 and is constantly evolving. As you can see on this timeline, there are various new Sentinel landscapes that are added over time. So the very first Sentinel landscape that was established in 2013 was Joint Base Lewis McChord. And then 10 years later, the Virginia Security Corridor was designated as a Sentinel landscape. And it's kind of crazy because it took 4 years from conception to designation, over which time our application went through several iterations until everyone agreed upon these 2 separate Sentinel landscapes that were going to make up this one Virginia Security Corridor. And then, like I said, it's always changing. There's a new request for applications out now. So if you know people out the country who may also want to form a Sentinel landscape, there is the opportunity for the addition of more over time. It might have been a little difficult to see on the map or on the timeline all of the different Sentinel landscapes, but I just wanted to show you here that we're one of 18 located across the country, and I'm including Guam in that count. Each Sentinel landscape is unique, but all serve the same purpose to strengthen that military readiness, conserve those natural resources, those agriculture and forestry economies, as well as increase climate change resilience. Virginia is kind of unique in that we have 3 Sentinel landscapes. So the Virginia Security Corridor is made up of 2, the Tidewater and the Potomac Sentinel landscapes. But then there's a portion of the Commonwealth that's in the Middle Chesapeake Sentinel landscape, and it overlaps with Naval Air Station Puxatonic River. So another cool thing is that the Tidewater and the Potomac Sentinel landscape are 2 Sentinel landscapes with it out of 4 in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which is just neat. There's if you look at the East Coast, there's kind of a lot going on. I wanted to let you all know that while each landscape technically only has 1 coordinator, we have a slew of people that we get to work with and a bunch of organizations that help us to facilitate work on the ground. So a Sentinel landscape designation facilitates dialogue and helps improve communication. It's there to help promote data sharing and to help unify priorities across a diverse group of these federal, state, local, private partners. There's a bunch of different stakeholders. This collaboration amongst everyone helps to provide tangible benefits to the military installations, natural and working lands, and all of the communities that fall within the landscape's boundary. So coordinators like myself, we help to bridge those relationships amongst defense, conservation, and agricultural partners on the ground. But we're simultaneously serving as liaisons between those local stakeholders as well as the agency headquarters. So Sentinel landscape coordinators also help to build capacity at that local level, but we're also helping to pursue additional funding for active and or potential projects within our footprint. A cool thing also is that when you receive a designation, there's like a lot of buzz around it. So you get this national attention that might not have been there before. And it provides the Sentinel landscape with a platform to advocate for additional resources for projects. Partners at the federal and state level, and then this is actually kind of like really cool. So partners at the federal and state levels, they're encouraged and they may choose to provide program-specific funding or give priority consideration in existing funding processes to landowners and land managers within that Sentinel landscape through a variety of different actions of their choosing. And we're also kind of like starting to see some of that buzz. We've already had a few success stories, and you know, the more I talk to people, the more we're hopeful that we'll continue to receive, you know, project-specific grants in the landscape for our partners. So there's a lot of wording on this slide. Please don't read it. But all of this is to say why the Virginia Security Corridor. Virginia is home to a multitude of installations and facilities that are vital to national defense. Notably, the DoD invests more federal funds per capita in Virginia than in any other state. Also, you know, leaning into those USDA interests, the state's agricultural and forestry sectors are the first and third largest private industries, and they generate billions of dollars and are hundreds of thousands of jobs. And the same can be said, well, and the military contributes significantly to the state's economy. And again, hundreds of thousands of jobs are associated with the military here. You may now be asking yourself, okay, but why is the Department of Forestry involved with the Sentinel Landscape Partnership? If you go and you look at all of the different Sentinel landscapes across the country, you'll see that more often than not, they're held by like a nonprofit or Legacy Works, which is the support organization for the Sentinel Landscape Partnership. But we have the designation, or we hold the designation, because the Department of Forestry was the entity that stepped forward and said, we think there's a need here, we think there's interest here, we want to put an application forward. So that's how this position fell within to the Department of Forestry. It's also pretty awesome because the Department of Forestry is well equipped to support the needs of what a Sentinel landscape needs. The mission of the Department of Forestry overlaps very nicely with the Sentinel Landscapes mission. We want healthy, sustainable forests. We want clean water. GEOF is also home to the newly established working lands, so there's also that opportunity to work with conserving lands and for forestry, cultural landscapes. We also have this well-established network of foresters and other specialists that are already working throughout the region and have connections with many of the organizations that we're currently partnering with. So that works really well. And then just so you guys are all aware, the Virginia Security Corridor is then housed within the watershed program of DOF, which is all about improving water quality by increasing riparian buffers, afforestation, and urban tree canopy. To give you guys, this is here to give you guys a little bit better geographic view of where the Sentinel landscape is located. So we're just zooming in to the southeast of Virginia over here. So as I mentioned before, the Virginia Security Corridor is comprised of two separate Sentinel landscapes. So the Potomac to the north, which is anchored by Marine Corps Base Quantico, and the Tidewater to the south in this pinkish color. Combined, we cover around 2.9 million acres of land, rivers, estuaries, shorelines, fragile ecosystems, prime farmland, and valuable forests. In this area, we're hoping to address challenges from rapid population growth and natural hazards that could threaten critical infrastructure and sustainable development. Another cool thing is that this initiative, as I mentioned before, links to the middle Chesapeake Sentinel landscape to the north, and then to the south, it links to the eastern North Carolina Sentinel landscape, which is helping to foster regional collaboration. And kind of a neat example of that already happening is there's a nature-based accelerator pilot that's happening in eastern North Carolina Sentinel landscape. They're focusing on the Albemarle-Pamlico watershed, which overlaps with Virginia. So much of the stuff that they're working on, they're going to be able to share with us so that we can work off of the work that they're doing and learn from their mistakes, I guess. And then I threw in a picture here. That's some work that was happening on Fort Eustis. They were working on some shoreline restoration. So if we zoom in even further, this takes you down to the Tidewater Sentinel landscape, which again is my Sentinel landscape. There's three major watersheds, the James, the York, and the Pasquotank. This Sentinel landscape is slightly smaller than the Potomac at 1.3 million acres. Pretty much, I think all of the localities in Hampton Roads plus Matthews County are fully or partially within the bounds of the Tidewater Sentinel landscape, and you'll see that breakdown over there on your left. I like to say there's 10 main installations in the Tidewater Sentinel landscape, but again, there's a lot going on there. And again, our anchor installation is Joint Base Langley Eustis, which is in Hampton and Newport News. Oh, and then I will have two offices. My main office is located in downtown Hampton at Virginia Tech's Coastal Collaborator. And then I have a space at ICAR, but I don't have keys yet. There's a lot going on. But I do want to thank Wendy and Jess for providing the opportunity to make it easier for everyone. If there's traffic, I don't necessarily have to drive to Hampton or vice versa. But it makes collaborating in 1.3 million acres a lot easier when you can meet people where they're at versus making them come to your side of the river. And then I just wanted to focus in a little bit on the Potomac Sentinel landscape to the north. Pictured there is Chris Moy. He has 3 installations located within his Sentinel landscape. Quantico, Fort Walker, and Fort Greg Adams. He has a Marine Corps base and 2 Army bases. And his major watersheds are the James, the York, and the Rappahannock. And I do want to point out that often along our boundaries, our work intersects. Often I have an installation that wants to conserve land or do a project that's in the other installation just based off of their priority areas. And the same kind of goes for Chris over there with Fort Greg Adams. So we are 2 separate landscapes, but we definitely work together quite often. So the VSC aims to safeguard military testing training, promote that sustainable land use, enhance climate resilience, and conserve critical habitats to improve water quality and protect endangered species. We have 3 main lines of effort, the first of which is to prevent military installation encouragement while supporting those working lands. We have 2 goals associated with this. One is to preserve high conservation value lands that also enhance military readiness, and then protect working forests and agricultural lands that are at risk of conversion and may be incompatible with the military's mission. Our second line of effort is to build resilience against climate-induced hazards, whether that's fire or flooding. We want to, and our main goal associated with that is to identify vulnerable assets and implement nature-based solutions. So think shorelines, wetland rehabilitation. And then our third line of effort is to conserve and restore key habitats with the goals of restoring off-installation habitat to protect an endangered species that may prevent military training restrictions. And then another goal is to establish resilience corridors for off-base marsh migration and large-scale land and water conservation. On this next slide, I thought about taking out, but then I wasn't quite sure who would be here for this audience, so I just wanted to do a plug-in for it. The Sentinel landscape is a federal designation, and basically the funding opportunities that were here before designation, should be here, as we're designated. Assuming nothing changes majorly with funding opportunities. But all of that to say is that if you are working with landowners or homeowners, we have a really cool resource on our website. If you go to the Sentinel landscape page and look at landowner resources, you can kind of sort through and find different funding options and opportunities ranging from like tax incentives or help with the coastal restoration projects for that like landowner based scale. So if you know someone, screenshot it, or if you're interested, explore that page. What I did want to do, however, was touch on and point out some very specific funding opportunities provided through the REPI program. So the DoD's REPI, or Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, preserves military mission by supporting cost-sharing agreements between the military service, other federal agencies, state and local governments, and private conservation organizations in order to avoid land use conflicts near military installations, while also addressing environmental restrictions that may limit military activities, and also to increase resilience to climate change. So there's like 5 big ones. There's like your traditional REPI, which I like to think of as easements and acquisitions. That's normally due around like May. A really cool one also is this REPI readiness. It's called RARI. So it's Readiness and Recreation Initiative. So that's kind of cool because it utilizes the National Park Service. They'll provide funding from unobligated land, water, and conservation fund balances and use that as potential map to REPI program funding, specifically for safeguarding natural areas, protecting water resources, cultural heritage sites, and recreation opportunities for the public, but also, again, while preserving the military mission. And the cool thing about that one is that REPI is used as a non-federal match for the land, water, and conservation fund in the Sentinel landscapes. I was told the NOFO for that, the notice of funding, will come out in January, though the month is almost over, and there's supposed to be a webinar in February, but I haven't seen it yet. Hopefully it'll be coming out soon. And we actually have a success story with this. There's an area of shoreline and marsh up in West Point that's actually being funded through this initiative already, so it's pretty cool. Another cool funding source is REPI Challenge. It's a competition, but it has designated funding for conservation partners to advance project outcomes outside, which is very important, outside of the installations through large-scale innovation, conservation, and climate resilience actions. So REPI Challenge is pretty cool. And then there's also NIFWIF's National Coastal Resilience Fund. So that was pretty cool. This past year, they said they'd contribute up to $15 million into the $140 million pot of money for NIFWIF for National Coastal Resilience Fund. Again, projects that benefit military mission, increase installation resilience to extreme weather events, and help defense communities. Again, the communities adapt to climate change. It ended up being $9 million over 13 projects, with just under $850,000 of that coming right here to Hampton Roads. I wanted, at that point, I wanted to take the opportunity to say that the Tidewater Sentinel Landscape is hosting in-person sessions with Mark Belton next February 7th to help organizations develop competitive grant applications. He's really neat because he's a retired Rear Admiral, I believe, with the Navy. He's contracted by the DoD to assist with this sort of thing, and he provides a wealth of knowledge. He also was stationed in this area, but he will be available, and we still have time slots open. So if you know an organization that may benefit from this and may want to put forward an IFWIF application for this grant in the future, please let me know, because it does, this year or next year, it's all going to benefit the landscape. And then America the Beautiful also has a cool funding pot of money specifically for Sentinel landscapes. This last year, they actually set aside $5 million specifically for designated or emerging Sentinel landscapes. Funding streams like the Longleaf Stewardship Fund through NIFWIF, there's also some language in there for Sentinel landscapes. So you just have to keep your eye out, because we're now designated as a Sentinel landscape, so there should be more and more funding opportunities that might not have been available to you. And I just wanted to point out on this one, again, you don't have to read the slide, but there are more REPI projects within the Sentinel landscape boundary than outside of it. And we're really hoping to just keep expanding that list and showing the real benefit of what it means to be a Sentinel landscape. So touching back onto that NIFWIF National Coastal Resiliency Fund, that $850,000 or $845,000 came right here to the city of Hampton. Joint Base Langley, out of Joint Base Langley uses, and the city of Hampton put together a project developing nature-based solutions to build resilience in the Black River estuary, and we received that funding, which was pretty awesome, because that was the first letter of recommendation that I got to put out in my coordinator position. But National Coastal Resiliency Fund, the key thing to remember is that you're supporting nature-based projects that enhance resilience for coastal communities, but they also have to enhance habitat for fish and wildlife, which shouldn't be hard. If you're working on one, you should also be benefiting the other. So like I said before, this is just a really cool project. They're developing a holistic series of nature-based solutions, such as thin layer placement for marsh enhancement. They're also doing a whole host of other things. And then the other cool thing with this is that complete 845,000 came strictly through the REPI pot of money, which there's only 18 landscapes and a certain amount, so you have I like to think you have a little higher chance of getting a grant funded that way. And then I'm only briefly going to touch on this because Joe Rieger is here with the Navy to talk about the Penman Spit project. But part of that was funded through REPI Challenge, with VIMS being the nominating partner to that. But REPI Challenge is competitive with that dedicated funding. But what I did want to point out is that there are 2 universities working on this project currently, VIMS and CRISPR Newport University, where there is monitoring happening for shoreline conditioning, beach and planted marsh grass condition, living shoreline reef performance, subtidal oyster restoration for reef performance. And I'm going to leave that there because, like I said, Joe is here to talk more on it. But like the general gist was, they did a project, but you still have to. There's still opportunities for research afterwards through monitoring and other options. And then kind of turning the other way, I wanted to highlight a success story in another Sentinel landscape, so outside of our boundaries, but the Avon Park Sentinel landscape in Central Florida, and their story with the Florida grasshopper sparrow. I am connected very personally to this story. You may not be able to tell, but that person on that 4x4 is me. Back in my more fun years, when I was doing habitat management and point counts and habitat assessments for this little brown bird, the Florida grasshopper sparrow. And I just love that, like, over a decade later, it's still making waves, and just the success that has happened there. But long story, a little shorter, I guess, I don't know. Over the past 2 decades, the Florida grasshopper sparrow population, it plummeted from more than 1,000 birds in the wild to less than 100, making it the most endangered bird in North America. But before 2012, these birds, they were just restricted to a few small conservation areas and private ranches that were near the Kissimmee River. And then all of us, not all of a sudden, federal and state agencies, universities, breeding facilities, and nonprofit organizations responded to this by improving management activities, increasing research specifically devoted to the sparrows, and then starting a captive breeding program. And then, like, organizations such as Archibald Biological Station, they started working very closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the DoD, and many of the other collaborators, in their working group. And since then, they've released lots of birds, but more than 300 grasshopper sparrows on the Air Force Range in the Avon Park Sentinel landscape, and they've done that since 2021. And it may seem odd releasing an endangered bird to an active bombing range, but the grasshopper sparrow thrives in the same type of open prairie environment that the Air Force maintains to support their critical training activities. So this little brown bird essentially forms a partnership with the DoD that not only benefits their needs for protecting land around the installation to prevent encroachment from the multitude of people who are flocking to Florida to live there, but also for the bird that needs this, this open prairie habitat. So it's like a win-win situation. But besides, they're doing a lot of other awesome work there. There's over 40 state and federally listed species there also. But I did want to highlight this conservation effort, not only for my personal connection, but it took an immense amount of data collection, collaboration, and determination to figure out what was happening and put forward a plan for recovery. And then also, as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for this presentation, I reached out to a whole bunch of the installations in our area, and I asked them if they had any research needs. And one of the responses I received was the need for data and models on predicting ecological system changes or migrations and losses to better predict vegetation communities and wildlife habitat locations and potential losses in the future. This data could help with predicting what species may become threatened and or endangered in the future, and potentially affect the military mission, through restrictions. Yeah, and they need data and models on predicting species adaptation, change likeliness. So also looking at seeing which species may be able to expand and adapt to new habitats versus those ones that might be specialists and they're not going to adapt well if they lose their habitat. Anyhow, moving on. I gotta speed up a little faster. I wanted to touch briefly on the legal authorities used for REPI projects. I am by no means a lawyer, so course overview. REPI is able to finance climate adaptations through 3 different legal authorities. You have the 10 USC 2684A, you have the Sykes Act, and you have IGSAs. I'll let you just, in the effort of moving through time, if you want to screenshot this to look more into it or dig into it, please do. But again, these are basically just like the legal authorities in order to do these like resiliency or conservation projects. I guess I will point out that IGSAs do allow DoD to participate in and fund public services typically administered by state or local governments and build on the resilience to climate change in areas where with these military installations. And I believe Joe is going to touch on IGSAs a little bit more following what I just talked about, or following my presentation. And I wanted to give a quick overview of your paths to collaborating with an installation. If you're looking to leverage those REPI funds for resilience research monitoring, you have 2 main paths forward. Either an installation is going to come and reach out to you, or you're gonna be a go-getter, see a need, fill a need, and reach out to someone at the installation because you see an opportunity that combines your research priorities and the military mission. So if that's the case, you're reaching out to an installation, you want to make sure that you're reaching out to the community planning liaison officer, then that's for the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force, or the plans analysis and integration officer for the Army. And again, I want to note, I'm here to help facilitate those connections. If you're unsure who to reach out to, please reach out for me. Please reach out to me. I'm here to help. And then I want to point out the fact that if you're working on a REPI project, you have to enter into a legal agreement, that legal partnership with the military, and that's necessary for any REPI project. So don't get ahead of yourself, and remember that when you see maybe like a cool funding opportunity. Don't forget to ask about that. We're gonna skip over this slide and just quickly some updates. We had our first kickoff meeting in November, and we're having our first work group meetings next week. And these are for encroachment and resiliency. If you're interested in participating, please reach out to me directly. I believe my contact information should be sent out after this webinar. I also have slides coming up that you can screenshot. This is our first work group meeting. If you want to be involved from the ground up, this is your chance. So yeah, next Monday. And then if you're interested in any of those appointments with Mark Belton and the National Coastal Resiliency Fund, please let me know. Here is my information and Chris's information. Again, if you're interested in reaching out to us, please screenshot this. And I want to make sure Joe has enough time to talk about one of the Navy's crown projects, the Penman Spit project over at Naval Weapons Station Yorktown. But Joe Rieger, my former boss and the Mid-Atlantic Environmental Resilience Program Manager, is here to again speak on that, and I'm going to let him take the stage now to hopefully pique your curiosities and want to become more involved with the Navy and the military mission. Joe.
Thanks, Mary. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mary, for inviting me to talk today, and also for ODU. A little back, I mean, most of you know me, but a little background. I got my master's degree actually at ODU in 2000, and then from there, worked at Elizabeth River Project for about 22 years. And then I've moved over since to the Navy at NAVFAC Mid-Atlantic, where I'm now the Environmental Resilience Program Manager. And this position, this newly created position, if Mary, you don't mind forwarding the slides real quick. My role at the Navy is to lead and implement and coordinate the Navy's Mid-Atlantic Environmental Resilience and Carbon Sequestration program. So a lot of you may not know, but specific to the Navy and with Navy funding, there are opportunities under both of these programs to do projects. And so carbon sequestration funds projects that help to sequester carbon. Environmental resiliency is focused at making installations or nearby properties close to installations more resilient. Part of my work also involves supporting the REPI program, which Mary just mentioned, along with participating in the Sentinel landscape work that's going on, both not only in the Chesapeake Bay area, but also in the Mid-Atlantic. And then working with other agencies and organizations on climate resilience policy and implementation of actions. And so, I've been kind of missing for the last 7 months trying to figure out the ins and outs of the Navy, and now I'm really starting to reach back out to the organizations I've worked with in the past to get them engaged and interested in some of the projects and ideas that we have locally and we can work on together. And then I oversee the kind of the contracting and the project management of all the projects that are funded through the environmental resiliency and carbon sequestration program. So, I help to develop project ideas, to submit them, and then work down all the way through the project management and contracting aspect. And kind of this is what I'm working on most right now, is trying to understand the contracting mechanisms out there to get funding to people, and also how to manage these funding efforts that are coming out of DC. Mary, next slide. Why do we have, so each of the regions have a person like me. They were just hired. Some of them haven't even been hired, but most of them have been hired. And so there's about 9 of us nationwide. And the reason they've hired us is because the Navy is one of the first DoD groups to actually set a carbon reduction goal, 5 million metric tons of CO2 per year using nature-based solutions by 2027. And so, most of the work that I worked at to try to carry out focuses very specifically on these nature-based solutions. And so some of the other resilient elements, though I do try to keep a pulse on, I'm not as involved because some of those can be grayer in manner. So the DoD, and again, this is in the Climate Action Plan 2030, that DoD will rely on these nature-based solutions to mitigate shoreline erosions and protect critical assets. So again, these are called out and by the Navy, and the funding that I just mentioned is there to help fund this goal for hopefully the number of years moving forward. Next slide, Mary. One example project, which actually is in the Sentinel landscape that Mary described, which is the Tidewater Sentinel landscape, and one that received both REPI and REPI Challenge money. Something you should know, those are, even though their name says REPI, those are two different pots of funding that one can get money from. And so this project is up by Virginia Institute of Marine Science. It's up on Kings Creek that you see here. Next slide. It's surrounded by National Park Service along with Yorktown and Cheetah-Mannix installations. There is this spit, also known as Penniman Spit shoreline, that's shown here. So you can see the spit reaching out into the York River. In 1937, it was 14.4 acres, which is outlined here in red. And then if you kind of look at the 2019 mean high water and mean low water, you see a significant reduction. You're now seeing 1.7 acres at high tide, and at low tide, 4.6 acres. So, significant amount of erosion has occurred at the spit over time. And you probably ask, well, what's the big deal? Well, behind this spit, kind of in the bottom of this photo, if you look, if you could see the rest of the photo, there's a large creek system that goes up into Yorktown, and in those creeks, there's significant erosion going on, and also there's also nearby Superfund sites where they don't want shorelines eroding away. So the concept was, could we build this spit back to help protect the installation, because it had lost over 10 acres of marsh over since 1937. Next slide. So the approach that was used on the bottom left shows kind of the existing spit that had been split into really two separate units you see there, was to use a hybrid living shoreline approach. The design was developed working with the installation and Virginia Institute of Marine Science. It included 5 rock sills with 5 gaps to allow water to flow through these gaps. And there was also breakwaters, along with sand backfill with marsh planting of high and low marsh. And then in front of these structures, placement of subtidal reefs, and in other locations, intertidal oyster reefs. So you can see at the bottom just a typical cross section of what the design looked like, and then in the top, it shows you a little bit more about the sill system that was put in place. The design overall was to be designed to address sea level rise in the future. So the sill structure and the sand elevations were elevated to allow for a little bit higher elevations for upper marsh and lower marsh, and then for the sills to be provide more protection over time by building them taller. Next slide. Here, so this past year, I kind of came in when this project was taking off. So the funding was in place, and they had a contractor in place. VIMS was overseeing the construction contract. And so again, it's about 2,000 linear feet of shoreline. Here's just some photos of the construction going on. Coastal Design and Construction, and who's Jim Gunn's organization, built this structure, working with folks up at VIMS. Next slide, Mary. And this is kind of the result that we had. This was finished in October of 2024, so not too long ago. It's seen a number of fairly large events, and it's holding up very well. Kind of the funding mechanism that for just this particular project, the dollars Mary showed earlier was mixed with some other work that had occurred at the installation, but it's about right around 4.2 million, which would include the REPI program money and the REPI challenge money. Some funding also from the environmental resilience funding that I helped to oversee and work with, and then some of these other organizations contributed funding for a lot of the planning and design elements. The major construction elements came from the two REPI funding that you see here, along with environmental resilience funding. Next slide. And so kind of focusing down on that environmental resilience funding, and this goes back kind of to my first or second slide, where this is the funding that is um, paired kind of with that carbon sequestration funding that the Navy has. So the Navy has on the order of about $40 million available for environmental resilience funding through this program, and it's competitive. I help installations pull together their projects, and then we submit them to headquarters, and then folks up the chain of command make the final decisions about these projects. So it's not your typical grant application process. The ones that have been funded in 2003 and 2004 are listed here. I'm not going to go into them, but you can kind of get a idea of the flavor of the different types of projects. These are throughout the Mid-Atlantic, so it's not just local, and kind of some of the locations that are shown here. But the key here is that, the first year, which is in 2003, we had about 2 million, and then 1 million. And then this past year, I think now that they have a person in place, I was able to get for the whole region, the Mid-Atlantic, right around $7.5 million, of which 2 million are going to be distributed locally. And those funds are for everything from additional designs at Yorktown to stormwater projects here in Norfolk, to projects that a 10-acre reforestation project on Naval Station Norfolk. So just to give you a kind of a flavor, they're all nature-based and design. And so some of them are construction and some of them are actually design work. But the idea is that we're moving them through this process. So next year, if we did a design this year, we'd be ready for construction the following year. I should also mention that this funding can be used off installation too. So, the Penniman Spit was a good example where they needed additional funding, and we were able to use this environmental resilience funding as a way to help fund that. And then the carbon sequestration is a smaller amount of money. I think last year it had about $6 million in it. And so they fund smaller projects. And so these two pots of funding, we are hoping will still, continue to provide project funding through the next number of years moving forward. So next slide. And then, so you may ask, like VIMS got the REPI money, so they got the REPI money directly. And I think one of the things that pops up, and Mary kind of hit on it, or at least toyed around with it, saying that, know that contracting would be required with the federal government, which can be a bit scary. And so there's two ways of doing this. There's especially for academic organizations. And so this is where I think ODU, looking out long-term and kind of strategically, could look at some of these opportunities for funding, which I don't believe you've used before. But to me, it seems like a perfect opportunity that hasn't been utilized, where the surrounding area we're so rich with installations that have needs for restoration or remediation, that these different cooperative agreements and or the interagency support agreements could be used. And so the one on the left, the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit work, this is kind of like what the cooperative agreement was, what VIMS used in order to get the contracted funds in order to get the REPI money for Penniman Spit. And so the other one, and they got a fairly significant amount of money for that single project. But another example that's been used is a recently signed agreement, this intergovernmental support agreement with the University of Georgia. One was recently signed for the Southeast, and also for the whole East Coast, where University of Georgia can provide services to the Navy specifically for nature-based designs, and also potential construction oversight using this IGSA model. And so, I think that that's something that ODU may want to evaluate if that's something that they may be interested in. And I see that Tom mentioned that that they are a member of the Chesapeake Watershed, CESU. So it sounds like there's an opportunity to collaborate with you guys using this. And again, I'm pretty new trying to figure out how to access these, but I think that's something that we should continue to look at how we could partner together with some of this funding we have, and also if there's a potential interest in developing one of these IGSAs for the university in the future. So just know that it's a to me it provides an opportunity. Once you have one in place, you basically can then provide more funding to the university in a quicker manner rather than having to go through your typical contracting process. So and then I think, is that my last slide, Mary? Yeah, so that's my last slide. And then, I've put my contact information here in the chat. So if you have questions or would like to reach out and talk more about this, feel free to. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of what the Navy is doing for resiliency and carbon sequestration, and some potential opportunities for partnering in the future. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Mary, for the presentation and for that discussion.